I'm going to invite Russ Marquez to come up. He's going to be sharing a testimony with us today. And as he comes on up, Russ and I have been having conversations for a number of months about a journey that to me was something really an intersection in his life that for me, as I think about it, kind of really started about September, mid-September of last year when he went to the hospital. And I think many of you know he went in the hospital because he was having issues with oxygen, and it was all part of COVID. And so I'm inviting Russ to share his story because it really is an amazing faith journey. And I've had the privilege to hear that journey, and some of you have heard pieces of it, but many of you have not heard his walk during the last, well, it's been for over a year. And actually, it's been more than a year, because as I said, that mid-September was part of the journey leading up to coming to this kind of crossroads in his life. And so I'm going to pass it over to Russ to share that testimony with you today. And I hope it washes over you and encourages you in your own faith walk. And so with that, Russ, thanks for getting up here. And so looking forward to hearing your story again.
Thanks, Mike. Good morning. Like Mike had said, this month marks a year from when I was in the hospital after getting COVID. It's kind of surreal when I think about it now, but it changed my life significantly. And what I wanted to share is not only what I went through in the hospital, but the profound impact it had on me since coming home. It was September last year, my family and I got sick with COVID. They recovered, but I went to the ER due to COVID pneumonia. I was admitted to the hospital, and I seemed to be getting better for about a week. I started getting my taste and smell back, and I could taste how bad the hospital food really was. Then the doctor said I got a pulmonary embolism. It's a blood clot in the lung, and also a blood clot in the thigh. They put me on blood thinners, and I would get a shot in the morning on this side, and then a shot in the evening on this side. And this went on for multiple days, so you can imagine my stomach was in a lot of pain. At this point, breathing became increasingly difficult, and my chest was burning, and I was in a lot of pain. I was put on stronger machines, but then I was maxing those out. I was no longer getting better. In fact, I was getting worse, and I was starting to decline. I remember the physical struggle to just breathe, and I felt like I was suffocating. After a couple of days, the doctor came in and he said, we're going to have to intubate you. You probably won't wake up. A lot of my friends that I told this to said, oh, how scary, how could the doctor say something like that? Naturally, I was praying since going to the hospital. But when the doctor said what he said, I was calm. And really, I was at peace. What could I do at that point? I literally prayed, my life is in your hands now, God. Whatever you decide, I trust it will be for the best. I was thinking about my dad who passed away May last year due to COVID. And my mom's brother and his wife, who passed away in August of last year due to COVID. And now my life was hanging in the balance. One thing I asked God was, please don't let my mom suffer anymore. But whatever you choose, I accept your wisdom. Then I text my final text to my wife to let her know how it could be my last. I would see her on the other side, wherever that was. So I was intubated for 15 days and in the ICU for 18 days. During that time, I lost 50 pounds. I have to say, that's not an ideal weight loss program. I don't recommend it. I was sedated, and thankfully, I don't remember that experience. However, I do remember some horrific and disturbing dreams while I was sedated. What was scary was that I couldn't differentiate from my dreams and reality. I was extremely confused and terrified. My wife was telling me later that during the daily phone calls that she would get from my doctor, that nothing they were doing was helping. They would turn down the ventilator to see if I could breathe on my own. And they were doing this every couple of days. Nothing was working. I was not responding to any of their treatments. And they were actually preparing my wife for the inevitable. Then suddenly, and the doctors don't know why, but on the 15th day I started to improve and was removed from the ventilator. During that time, I had an experience that really changed my life. I'll concede I was on a lot of strong drugs that made me hallucinate. I was oxygen deprived for quite a while. My body was fighting off a terrible virus. All those things can affect the way the brain acts in very strange ways. But I had an experience. And I'll explain a little bit of that to you. So it felt like I was traveling outside of time and space. I was in total darkness, yet I was traveling within an envelope of light and color. And it felt like I was traveling for over 4 months. And I don't know where I was going, and I didn't know when I would get there. But then suddenly this shackle came up on a chain and grabbed me by the ankle and started pulling me down. And I would get pulled down into this giant cavern. And there were torches everywhere to light it up as if it was day. And then in the middle, I see these piles of rocks stacked up on each other. And then on top was like this throne-type chair thing. And there were people spiraled all the way around these stones. And I get pulled down to this throne thing, and I couldn't see who was sitting on there, but I could hear. And it said to me, "You're mine." And I said, "No, I'm not." Now, you got to understand, this is probably the most terrifying experience I've ever had to endure. I felt like my bones were shaking to the core. I didn't want to be there. I didn't belong there. But then this thing said, "Okay, I'll make a deal with you. You bring me 15 souls and I'll let you go." And I'm like, let's do it. I don't want to be here, right? So next thing I know, I'm in this cave, and I could see the opening to the cave. So I'm thinking in my head, I'm like, okay, all I have to do is find bad people, because they probably deserve it. So it's really easy to find out who the bad people are by just looking at them. So I found this guy, and I said, "Oh, there's a bad guy. I'll pick him." And I get up to him to select him, and I'm like, what am I doing? I can't do this. This is wrong. I don't know this person's heart. I don't know what God has planned for them. I don't know the purpose here. I can't do this. And I ran. I ran out of the cave. And I refused to do that. And as you walk out of the cave, you're in complete darkness, and you walk into the light of day, and your eyes are really hard to see at that time. But I walked out, I didn't know where I was. And I turned the corner, and I see my dad. I see my grandparents. And I see my ancestors. There was a fire, and they were making beans and rice and tortillas. The smell was amazing. They were playing musical instruments and singing and dancing and having a great time. And I was like, I want to be part of this. And I was starting to head towards them thinking, yes, this is what I want to do. But then I wasn't allowed to partake. I couldn't join them. And I was so disappointed. And as I was walking away, my dad came up to me and he said, don't give up. So I continued on my journey. And I was given a couple more people to select, I guess, and I refused. And then the next thing I see, I'm traveling outside of time and space again. But this time, a hand reaches up and grabs me by the ankle and pulls me back down into this cavern. And this thing says, you broke our agreement. Now you belong to me. And I said, no, I belong to Jesus Christ. And he lets me go going, no. And I'm floating away. And as I'm floating away, I see this woman at his feet said, why did you let him go? He goes, I didn't have a choice. And I float out of that room, and that's when I started to wake up. Now, I don't know what all that means, but it left an impression that stayed with me while I started the recovery process, and even to this day. Even as I started regaining my awareness of my surroundings and then moved to my own room, I couldn't stop thinking about it. Was it real? Was it a dream? I have no idea. But as I continued to struggle with recovery, I wasn't giving up. I lost so much weight. When they were putting the blood thinner in my belly, there was no fat anymore. It was just skin. And so they were just putting that needle in loose skin, and that burned this time. I was extremely weak, and it was very difficult to move. I couldn't lift myself, roll over, or walk on my own. I had to learn to walk again, and I needed a walker. Because I had the ventilator tube down my throat for so long, I had to learn to swallow. Because of the damage due to the pneumonia and blood clot, I had to learn to breathe on my own. And my diaphragm didn't work well. It atrophied. And I was assisted with supplemental oxygen. I also had a feeding tube up my nose and down into my stomach. It was very challenging and difficult. There were many times I didn't want to do my exercises. I didn't want to move. I didn't want to walk. The therapist came in and he asked if I wanted to do my exercises. And I'm like, no, I don't. It hurt. It was hard. And I remember he would bring the walker over to my chair or to my bed, and I'd slowly get my feet off the edge of the bed, but I couldn't sit up. I had no strength. He had to lift me up, and then I'd shakily lift myself up onto the walker. I'd walk 5 steps to the door, turn around, walk 5 steps back to my bed, and I'd break out in a full body sweat, and my lungs burn, and it felt like I ran a marathon. But I'm a fighter. I didn't want to give up. One of the hardest things I had to endure while in the hospital was that because of COVID, I couldn't see my family. We could only talk or text on the phone. I felt alone and missed my family, and I needed them more than ever. A week later, still very weak, my feeding tube got plugged, and the nurses had to replace the tube. So they had to pull the tube out of my nose, and then they tried to put a new one in. And when they put the new one in, it would get curled up right here. And they're like, oh, weird, that's weird. So they pull it back out and tried pushing it back up into my nose, and it get curled up again. And they didn't know why. So they pull it out and I said, okay, we'll go talk to the doctor. They came back, And the doctor said, oh, it doesn't have to go back in. He can start eating food. Of course, that food was Jell-O pudding, applesauce, that kind of thing. I do believe that once they removed my feeding tube, I really started getting better. My progress really started to improve. The doctors and nurses were amazed how quickly I was recovering. They told me that the people who go through what I did and survive tend to have a lot of organ problems or brain damage. And I don't seem to have either of those issues. I have some minor issues, but I'm still working through those. The ICU nurses would come to my room because they heard about me and wanted to see how I was doing, especially since they're the ones that were taking care of me. They said I was a small handful of patients in the COVID ICU that had survived. I do appreciate the doctors and nurses that cared for me. But you know, I'm even more grateful for God's power. His mercy, all praise and glory belongs to Him. That can't be ignored. There's no other explanation. I was in the hospital for 43 days. Then I was sent to rehab for 10 more days. I was working with occupational therapists, physical therapists, as well as memory therapists. I had an oxygen tube to help me breathe, and I used a walker to walk as I regained my strength. It was so physically difficult and demanding. When I was able to take a shower, I needed assistance. I couldn't do it on my own. But I felt good to be clean. After 43 days, that was pretty important. I didn't realize how much I took for granted of the simplest tasks. From showering to drying to dressing myself. So hard, so challenging, and so exhausting. One good thing about being in the rehab facility, my wife and kids and my brother and friends could come and visit me. Seeing them encouraged me to continue to fight, continue to not give up, despite all the challenges that I faced. It was mentally and emotionally difficult, just as much as it was physically challenging. I was finally able to go home November 2nd. That was a wonderful feeling, and that was 3 days ago, a year ago. I remember asking the doctor if I'll be back to my normal self in a couple of weeks. He tried not to laugh. He said, unfortunately, it'll be many months, but he expected a full recovery. I really didn't understand what that meant, but I do now. It's been over a year and I'm still recovering. I had in-home OT and PT and a nurse to help me for about a month and a half. Mind you, I couldn't work, so I was home all this time. I really couldn't do anything but sit on the sofa. I used a walker for a couple of weeks at home. My exercises strengthened my legs enough I could put the walker aside. I was on an oxygen concentrator until the end of December. I slowly started to remove the oxygen through the day. I still needed it for showers and sleeping, but eventually that came off at the end of the year. Mid-January of this year, I was able to return to work full-time. Even though my recovery and healing are such a slow process, I continue to improve. Again, it's so surreal to realize what I went through for 53 days in the hospital, and I survived. While recovering at home, I had a lot of free time. I mean, a lot of free time. It was probably the longest I've not worked for over 25 years. However, it did give me a perfect opportunity for meditation, prayer, and study. And I thought about a lot of things. A lot of things I don't have answers to, a lot of things that are hard to comprehend. I turned to God to help me sort out what I just went through and why. I still don't know if I fully understand or have all the answers, but a few things came to mind. Patience. I can honestly say I'm learning a lot about patience. I always thought I was a patient person. If you're married or have kids, developing patience is a must. However, I would question Why can't I heal faster? I know I survived a horrific experience, so why can't I just heal quickly? Why is it taking so long? It is so unbearably slow. God, can't you just wave your hand and make me better? What I realize is that it's not up to me. My plans are not God's plans. My ways are not his ways. His thoughts are definitely not my thoughts. I realize my finite mind can't truly comprehend what God's plans would be for me. I must have patience that it is God's will when I am fully healed. Regardless, it's all for his praise and glory. I must trust God and I must trust God's wisdom. He oversees all things, no matter how big or small. Humility. As I mentioned, when I was in the ICU for 18 days, I lost 50 pounds. I was stripped of my muscle, my strength, my core, my athletic abilities. I basically looked like loose skins hanging on bones. I was horrified of what I became. I was very discouraged. Do you know how many years it took me to get to where I was? Now I can't run, I can't break a sweat, I could barely walk. I agonized over what I had become. All the things that I attributed to myself were gone. Yet as I sat there, I was wondering what it was that got me to this position. I'm the type of person that I want to know why, I want to know how, and I want to know when. And I get very frustrated when I don't have those answers. Maybe I don't need those answers. Maybe I should have been asking who. Through this experience, I recognized I am selfish, I am arrogant, and I am so judgmental. Maybe not on the outside, but deep down I knew that's who I was, or am, and I didn't like it. You know, maybe I didn't give God the praise and glory for my accomplishments. Maybe I took too much for granted and attributed too much to myself. I came to realize it's not about me. I am nothing without God, and it is because of his grace, because of his mercy, that I believe I'm here today. It was a real eye-opener. Because if I'm not changing this, anything else I do is irrelevant. It's almost like whatever I did before, that foundation of me has been toppled. Now I'm slowly building my structure back. But this time, I'm giving God the glory. I'm praising and thanking him. It's really all about him, and I'm nothing without him. My ignorance, my arrogance, and my selfishness has kept me from strengthening my relationship with Christ. Faith. This experience has definitely strengthened my faith. It's amazing what happens when you have nothing left but Christ, and I actually make an effort to develop my relationship with him. Regardless of what I thought I knew, something happened that it made it even more real for me. I realized I needed spiritual healing. That healing strengthens my faith. Then my physical healing will give God all the praise and glory that he deserves. Joy. Even though what I experienced was horrible, there were others that experienced much, much worse. I had a roommate in the hospital suffering from COVID. He was an elderly man. Him and his wife came in with COVID together. She passed away. He went home. And he would sob next to me. And it was so heartbreaking. I had another roommate who broke both ankles in an accident, had surgery, pinned, and in a cast. I had another roommate who had terminal stomach cancer and was going to hospice. It was sad. And I found myself praying for each and every one of them. I sincerely prayed for their comfort, their healing, and that they don't suffer, and that God would be with them. The weird thing is, when I wasn't focused on my own suffering and focused on someone else, It gave me a completely different perspective and mindset. I now have a tremendous amount of compassion for those who suffer. And through my suffering, it gave me so much joy. I experienced great joy knowing God was with me despite the challenges I faced. I wasn't focused on poor me, but what to next, God? Not what did I do wrong or why are you angry with me, but the joy of knowing that my faith has strengthened and I get to know God even more. Hope. When I was lying there, waiting to be taken into ICU, waiting to be sedated, I knew God was with me. I was calm. I was ready. There was really nothing left to fear. I had hope, regardless of the outcome. I knew I would be healed either way. A hope that God's promises will be fulfilled. All things are for His glory. Even though my family couldn't be with me, I knew I wasn't alone. I knew God was with me every moment I was in the hospital and every moment after. I can't ignore that anymore, no matter how I try to rationalize it. I had an experience I don't really understand or fully comprehend, but I know it has changed me forever. Something that really shows me how insignificant I really am, and yet through God's love, I have hope. That hope gives me tremendous faith. That hope gives me unending joy. Now I want to share it with everyone I know. Today, despite my health challenges that I still face and the slow improvements that I am making, I hope to be fully healed, and I continue to seek to be spiritually healed. Every morning becomes a moment of rejoice. Every breath becomes a prayer of gratitude. My faith, my joy, my love, my hope is in my relationship with Jesus. And that is what I wanted to share today.